Some moments change everything. For Marcus Williams, that moment came at 1:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night. He was emptying trash cans on the executive floor when he heard a conversation that made him freeze. The CEO was planning something that would destroy thousands of lives. Marcus had a choice: walk away and pretend he heard nothing, or risk everything to do what was right. Marcus Williams had been working the night shift at Grandview Industries for 3 years. At 35, he carried himself with quiet dignity, his uniform always clean, his work ethic unquestionable. The 40-story glass tower in downtown Chicago housed one of the city's most respected companies, and Marcus took pride in keeping those floors spotless. Every night from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., he moved through the building like a ghost, cleaning offices while the corporate world slept. Most employees never saw him. To them, he was invisible, just another service worker who made sure their workspace was ready each morning. But Marcus saw everything. He knew which executives stayed late, which ones left dirty coffee cups, and which ones treated the building like their personal kingdom. He'd learned to read people through their trash, their habits, their carelessness. Marcus wasn't bitter about being overlooked. He understood his place in the corporate hierarchy. But what he didn't understand was how people could be so wasteful, so dismissive of others, when they had everything he'd ever dreamed of having. Still, he did his job with pride, because his grandmother had taught him that honest work was always honorable work, no matter what others thought. That Tuesday night started like any other. Marcus clocked in at 10 p.m., gathered his supplies, and began his routine. He started on the lower floors and worked his way up, saving the executive level for last. By 5:30 a.m., most of the building was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 40 floors below. As he approached the executive floor, Marcus noticed something unusual. Light was streaming from under CEO Richard Grandview's office door, and he could hear voices. This wasn't entirely uncommon. Sometimes executives worked late or held conference calls with international clients. Marcus had learned to work quietly around these situations, giving the executives their privacy while still doing his job. But as he moved closer with his cleaning cart, something in the tone of the conversation made him pause. There was urgency in the voices, and an edge that sounded almost conspiratorial. Marcus wasn't the type to eavesdrop, but something about what he was hearing made his instincts kick in. The pension fund transfers need to happen before the quarterly audit, he heard CEO Richard Grandview saying. If we time it right, we can move the money offshore before anyone notices the shortfall. Marcus froze. His hands gripped the handle of his cleaning cart as the words sank in. Pension fund, transfers. These weren't terms he expected to hear in a legitimate business conversation at 1:47 a.m. What about the employees? Another voice asked. Marcus recognized it as CFO Patricia Wells. When they retire and their pensions aren't there, that's a problem for whoever's running this company in 10 years, Grandview replied coldly. By then, I'll be living comfortably in the Cayman Islands. The employees will figure something out. They always do. Marcus felt his stomach drop. 8,000 people worked for Grandview Industries. 8,000 people who trusted their futures to the company's pension plan. 8,000 people who had no idea that their CEO was planning to steal their retirement money. He stood there in the hallway, his heart pounding so loud he was afraid they might hear it. This was the moment that would define everything that came next. Marcus could walk away, finish his shift, and pretend he'd never heard anything. He could protect himself, keep his job, and let someone else deal with whatever consequences came later. Or he could risk everything to do what was right. Marcus had grown up in Chicago's South Side, where his grandmother had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 8. She'd worked 3 jobs to keep him fed and in school, always telling him that character wasn't measured by what you did when people were watching, but by what you did when no one would ever know. Baby, she used to say, the world's gonna try to tell you that you don't matter because of where you come from or what you look like. But what matters is what's in here. She'd tap his chest with her finger. And what's in here don't care about money or status. It only cares about right and wrong. Standing in that hallway, Marcus could practically hear her voice. He thought about the maintenance workers on the lower floors, the security guards, the administrative assistants, the warehouse workers, all of them counting on their pensions to carry them through their golden years. He thought about James, the older security guard who talked about retiring in 2 years to spend time with his grandchildren. He thought about Maria, the administrative assistant, who'd been with the company for 15 years and always asked about Marcus's family. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were real people with real lives and real dreams. Marcus quietly moved his cart away from the door and continued down the hallway, his mind racing. He finished cleaning the rest of the floor on autopilot, barely aware of what he was doing. The conversation he'd overheard played over and over in his head. Pension fund transfers, offshore accounts. The employees will figure something out. By the time his shift ended at 6 a.m., Marcus had made his decision. He went home to his small apartment on the west side and sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, trying to figure out his next move. He couldn't go to the police without evidence. He couldn't go to the media without proof. And he certainly couldn't confront Grandview directly. That would accomplish nothing except getting him fired and possibly sued. But Marcus had something that Grandview didn't know about X. As the night janitor, Marcus had keys to every office, every filing cabinet, every space in the building. More importantly, he had time. While everyone else was sleeping, he had hours to gather the evidence needed to stop Grandview's plan. It was dangerous. If he got caught, he'd lose more than just his job. He could face criminal charges for breaking and entering, theft, corporate espionage. His life as he knew it would be over. But 8,000 people were counting on him, even though they didn't know it. The next night, Marcus returned to work with a plan. He went through his normal routine, but when he reached the executive floor, he made a detour. Using his master key, he entered Grandview's office and began photographing documents with his phone. Financial statements, offshore account information, correspondence with banks in the Cayman Islands. What he found was worse than he'd imagined. Grandview hadn't just planned to steal from the pension fund, he'd already been doing it for months. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as he grew bolder. The employees' retirement money was being systematically drained to fund Grandview's personal investments and offshore accounts. Marcus spent the next week gathering evidence. He copied emails, photographed financial documents, and recorded conversations using his phone. He was meticulous, knowing that he'd only get one chance to expose the truth. But Marcus knew he needed help. He couldn't take down a CEO by himself. He needed someone with the power and credibility to make the evidence count. That's when he remembered Angela Washington. Angela was an investigative journalist for the Chicago Tribune who had broken several major corporate corruption stories over the past few years. Marcus had read her articles and respected her commitment to holding powerful people accountable. More importantly, she had a reputation for protecting her sources. Marcus reached out to Angela through an encrypted email account, providing just enough information to get her attention without revealing too much. He told her he had evidence of major corporate fraud at Grandview Industries and that thousands of employees' pensions were at risk. Angela was skeptical at first. She'd received tips from disgruntled employees before, and most of them turned out to be more about personal grievances than actual wrongdoing. But something about Marcus's message felt different. The details were specific, the evidence described was substantial, and the potential impact was enormous. They arranged to meet at a small diner on the south side, far from downtown and the corporate world. Marcus arrived first, choosing a corner booth where they could talk privately. When Angela walked in, he recognized her immediately from her photo byline, but she looked around uncertainly until he waved her over. "You're Marcus?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from him. He nodded, studying her face. Angela was a black woman in her early 40s, professionally dressed, but approachable. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, but not unkind. "Before we start," she said, "I need you to know that I take source protection seriously. Whatever you tell me will be kept confidential if that's what you want. But I also need you to understand that if what you're saying is true, this is going to be a big story. People are going to want to know where the information came from." Marcus had already thought about this. I understand. I'm not looking for credit or attention. I just want to stop what's happening before it's too late." Over the next hour, Marcus laid out everything he'd discovered. He showed Angela the photographs, the recorded conversations, the evidence of money being moved to offshore accounts. Her expression grew more serious with each piece of evidence. "This is," she paused, looking through the documents again, "this is criminal fraud on a massive scale. How long has this been going on?" "From what I can tell, at least 8 months," Marcus replied. "And it's accelerating. Grandview is planning to make a major transfer next week that will drain most of what's left in the pension fund." Angela leaned back in the booth, processing what she'd heard. "You know what you're risking by bringing this to me, right? If Grandview finds out you're the source, he'll destroy you." "He's already destroying 8,000 people," Marcus said quietly. "At least I have a choice." That's what convinced Angela that Marcus was genuine. He wasn't motivated by money or revenge or personal gain. He was risking everything simply because it was the right thing to do. Re-hook. But what Marcus didn't know was that while he'd been gathering evidence against Grandview, someone had been watching him, and that someone was about to make his mission much more dangerous. Over the next few days, Angela worked to verify Marcus's evidence through her own sources. She contacted former Grandview employees, financial experts, and regulatory officials. Everything checked out. The evidence was solid, the story was real, and the potential impact was devastating. But as Angela dug deeper, she discovered something that made the situation even more urgent. Grandview wasn't just planning to steal the pension money, he was planning to declare the company bankrupt immediately afterward, leaving employees with nothing, and making it nearly impossible for law enforcement to recover the stolen funds. The bankruptcy filing was scheduled for the following Monday. The day was Thursday. Angela called Marcus with the news. "We need to move fast," she told him. "I'm going to run the story tomorrow, but we need to get this information to the right people before Grandview can cover his tracks." Marcus felt a surge of panic. "What if he finds out it was me?" "We'll deal with that when we have to," Angela said. "Right now, 8,000 people are about to lose everything. We can't let that happen." That night, Marcus returned to work knowing it might be his last shift at Grandview Industries. As he moved through the building, he looked at everything differently. The offices he'd cleaned for 3 years, the hallways he'd walked thousands of times, the place where he'd earned his living. It all felt surreal now. He was the janitor who was about to bring down the CEO. As he worked, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Grandview was in his office again, but this time he wasn't alone. Through the glass walls, Marcus could see him meeting with several men in suits. They were shredding documents and loading boxes. They were destroying evidence. Marcus quickly took out his phone and began recording. He captured footage of the document destruction, the removal of files, and conversations about cleaning up loose ends. It was exactly the kind of evidence Angela would need to prove that Grandview knew he was about to be exposed. But as Marcus was recording, one of the men noticed him. The man whispered something to Grandview, who looked up and stared directly at Marcus through the glass wall. Marcus's heart stopped. He'd been caught. Grandview said something to the men, and they began walking toward the door. Marcus had seconds to decide what to do. He could run, but they'd catch him before he reached the elevator. He could try to hide, but there was nowhere to go on the 40th floor. Instead, Marcus did something unexpected. He uploaded the video he'd just recorded to the cloud and sent it to Angela with a message. "Emergency. They use everything." Then he went back to cleaning. When Grandview and his men emerged from the office, they found Marcus emptying a trash can, apparently oblivious to what had been happening. He looked up as they approached, his expression curious but not worried. "Excuse me," Grandview said, his voice tight with suspicion. "How long have you been working on this floor tonight?" "About an hour, sir," Marcus replied politely. "I started at the other end and worked my way down. Is there a problem?" Grandview studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. But Marcus had spent 3 years being invisible to these people. He knew how to play the role they expected from him. "No problem," Grandview said finally. "Just finish up and move to another floor." "Yes, sir," Marcus said, and went back to his work. As the men walked away, Marcus heard one of them say, "Just the janitor. He doesn't know anything. If only they knew." The next morning, Angela Washington's story hit the front page of the Chicago Tribune. CEO steals millions from imitating pensions. Read the headline, followed by a detailed expose that included photographs of documents, recorded conversations, and video evidence of document destruction. The story exploded across social media. National news outlets picked it up within hours. The FBI launched an immediate investigation. The Securities and Exchange Commission froze Grandview Industries' assets, and Richard Grandview went from respected CEO to federal fugitive in less than 12 hours. Marcus was at home when the story broke, watching the news coverage with a mixture of relief and terror. He'd done it. He'd stopped Grandview's plan and saved the pension fund. But he knew it was only a matter of time before someone figured out that he was the source. That afternoon, his phone rang. It was Angela. "Marcus, I need you to know that the FBI wants to meet with you," she said. "They need your testimony to build their case against Grandview." "What does that mean for me?" Marcus asked. "It means you're going from invisible to the star witness in one of the biggest corporate fraud cases in Chicago history," Angela replied. "It's not going to be easy, but you're going to be protected, and more importantly, you're going to be the hero who saved 8,000 people's retirement." That evening, Marcus returned to Grandview Industries for what he thought would be his last shift. But when he arrived, something unexpected was waiting for him. The main lobby was filled with employees, people from every department, every level of the company. Security guards, administrative assistants, warehouse workers, executives, managers, custodial staff. They were all there, and they were all waiting for him. As Marcus walked through the door, the crowd began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to a thunderous ovation that echoed through the marble lobby. Marcus stopped, overwhelmed by what he was seeing. James, the security guard who was planning to retire in 2 years, stepped forward. His eyes were wet with tears. "Marcus," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my retirement. You saved all of our retirements. You saved our family's future." One by one, employees came up to Marcus to shake his hand, to hug him, to thank him for risking everything to protect them. Maria, the administrative assistant, was crying as she hugged him. "I have 2 kids in college," she whispered. "Their futures were in that pension fund. You saved my children's education." Marcus was overwhelmed. For 3 years he'd been invisible to these people. Now they were calling him a hero. But the biggest surprise came when the board of directors approached. They had fired Richard Grandview and were working with federal authorities to recover the stolen money. They wanted to offer Marcus a position as head of security and employee advocacy, a role that would involve protecting workers' rights and ensuring that something like this could never happen again. "We need someone we can trust," the board chairman said. "Someone who proved that they'll do the right thing even when it costs them everything. That's you, Marcus." Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him, people whose lives he'd protected, whose futures he'd secured, whose faith in justice he'd restored. 3 years ago, he'd been invisible. Tonight, he was exactly where he belonged. Final rehook, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one with the corner office or the expensive suit. Sometimes it's the one with the courage to do what's right, even when nobody's watching. 6 months later, Marcus Williams stood in a federal courthouse watching Richard Grandview being led away in handcuffs. The former CEO had been convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He would spend the next 20 years in federal prison. The pension fund had been fully restored, and new safeguards were in place to prevent future theft. Marcus's new role at the company had evolved into something even more meaningful. He now traveled to other corporations, helping them build systems to protect their employees and prevent fraud. But the most important change was how Marcus saw himself. He was no longer invisible. He was no longer just the janitor. He was Marcus Williams, the man who proved that heroism doesn't require a title or a corner office. It just requires the courage to do what's right. And every night, before he went to sleep, Marcus could hear his grandmother's voice. "What matters is what's in here." She'd tap his chest with her finger. And what's in here don't care about money or status. It only cares about right and wrong. Marcus had chosen right, and in doing so, he'd changed not just his own life, but the lives of 8,000 people who would retire with dignity because one man decided that doing the right thing was worth the risk. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest truth. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who sees everything clearly. And sometimes the janitor is the one who saves the day. What about you? If you witnessed something wrong, would you have the courage to speak up? Would you risk everything to protect people you barely know? Marcus Williams did, and because of that choice, thousands of families will have the retirements they worked their entire lives to earn. The next time you see someone working quietly in the background, the janitor, the security guard, the person everyone else ignores, remember Marcus Williams. Remember that heroes don't always wear capes or sit in corner offices. Sometimes they wear uniforms and carry cleaning supplies. Sometimes they're invisible until the moment they choose to be seen. Never underestimate the power of one person doing the right thing. Never underestimate the impact of choosing courage over comfort. And never underestimate the hero who might be walking among us, invisible to everyone except the people whose lives they're about to save.